Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from Los Angeles, California. Now today may look a little different because I'm sitting in a very different spot in my yard. And this is the spot in my yard that would be most enjoyed by our subject of our critter chat today, the pigs. You may notice my little dog back here. He's doing something that's quite similar to what pigs would be doing if they were in this space as well, and that's looking around for food. Pigs spend most of their waking hours looking for food, and they would absolutely love this little spot in my yard. So here at my house, this is a little courtyard that's just off of my bedroom, and this is a huge olive tree right behind me, and all around here is pretty much just dirt. This spot is very shady, and with all the rain that we've had in the last couple of weeks, this spot tends to stay pretty moist and pretty muddy for quite a while, and that is why the pigs would absolutely love this space. And so in their honor, I'm sitting in the mud today. But before we get started in today's critter chat, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're having fun, being safe, being happy. And today we're talking about one of my favorite species, the pig family. I've had the opportunity to work with 4 different species of pigs in a zoo setting, and I've seen some of those out in the wild. So it will be pretty fun. I really loved working with pigs, and it was kind of an unexpected love. I didn't ever think much of them until I got to know them a little better and what they were capable of and how they reacted to people who they knew. And that was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So to start off with on our critter chat today, just a reminder, full episodes are uploaded later on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you missed the live feed, or if you catch it in a story setting or a shortened version on Instagram, you can always hop over to the Zoo Nerd profile on Facebook or YouTube and catch it there. But to start off with talking about pigs, I'm not necessarily talking about the pink ones with the curly tail that we eat and call bacon or pork chops or anything like that. I'm talking about their wild relatives. And they're sometimes called wild swine or boars or hogs, but they're all kind of the same names or different names for the same group of animals. Now there are 18 species of wild pigs out there in the world, and our domesticated pigs, which are many, many different breeds of pigs, are all descended from the same one, and that's the Eurasian wild hog. Those are the wild pigs that live throughout Europe and Asia, particularly in like a forested setting, and people started domesticating them or raising them on their own for a food source about 7,000 years ago. So pigs have been important to people for quite a long time. And in many different areas of Europe and Asia that occurred. So that occurred in China, that occurred in India, that occurred throughout many of the countries in Europe as well. So pigs are pretty important. They're also very important to their ecosystem. If you've ever done any gardening, you may know that before you get started gardening, you kind of need to dig up the dirt, and that helps to get the dirt active and integrated with a lot of the different nutrients that are in the dirt, and it helps the soil to be able to breathe a little better, and the oxygen's an important part of helping break down any leaves or old plant material or other organic matter like poop that may be sitting around in the dirt. And all of those things help combine to help plants grow nice and healthy. And pigs, they're nature's way of doing that. They're really good about digging up the dirt, and they have a built-in shovel, and it's not their hands or their feet or their hooves, it's their nose. Their nose works very well as a shovel, and it's one of the defining features of a pig. Pigs also have really large ears. They can move them independently to help them hear really well, and that is one of their key ways of communicating with each other is through noise, And also, it's one of the ways that they really help be alert for danger, is with their ears. They listen for things. The other way is their sense of smell. Pigs have an amazing sense of smell. And part of what they do when they're digging around in the dirt with their nose, that's called rooting, they're looking for food. And they eat a variety of different things. Most pigs are actually considered omnivores. So that means they'll eat some plants and some animals. Typically the animals that a pig would eat would be very small things, bugs. So they'll eat worms, they'll eat bugs, they'll eat a variety of other things, and occasionally if they find something dead, like a little bird or a lizard, they would eat that as well. Occasionally they do kill things, and occasionally they do eat things that they kill. But mostly they're looking for plants. They love to eat the roots of a plant. So if you think about that, what roots we eat, we love to eat potatoes or sweet potatoes or carrots, and those are all root vegetables, and pigs love those as well. Now pigs, in addition to their large ears and beautiful nose that has a really good sense of smell, their eyes are kind of small, and their vision is usually not that great, but their sense of smell and hearing are both really amazing. With wild pigs, the males usually have tusks that hang out of their mouth, and they use those kind of to fight with each other and to help gain territory or gain breeding rights to females in different areas. A group of pigs is called a sounder, and that's kind of a fun name. In the wild, that's usually one male with several different females and then all of their babies. So depending on the species, that can be just a small group of maybe like 5 or 6 animals, or it can be as many as 20 to 30, depending on the species and the habitat they're living in. Now, one thing that I think is pretty interesting with pigs is that wild pigs live on 3 continents. And that's Europe, that's Asia, and that's Africa. Now, originally that's where they came from. But as people started moving around the planet, they would sometimes take pigs with them. And that happened here in the Americas. And so we have wild pigs in parts of the United States, particularly down in the southeastern part of the states, from about Texas over to Florida, up through Georgia, the Carolinas. Those are also sometimes called razorbacks. Those are all descendants of wild pigs, European wild boars, that have then come to the US and live as a feral population. Feral means that they once were owned by people and now they are living wild on their own. And they're actually kind of a bit of a problem in a lot of areas. They've also been introduced to a lot of the islands and Australia, and there's sometimes animals there. Now, there are pigs that live wildly in Africa, Asia, Europe, and some of the island groups around Asia. That's where a lot of the really rare pigs come from, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those in a bit. So pigs, with their communication with each other, they really rely on their hearing, and they make a lot of different vocalization sounds. That will often be like an alarm call if they feel there's danger in the area. And when they make that noise, everybody listens, and then they all react. When I've seen this, I've seen it with warthogs over in Africa, in Kenya, and it's kind of a high-pitched squeal sound, and all the warthogs' ears flare out when they hear that squealing sound, and then their tails go up, and they run for cover. And they don't always know where the danger is, so they just run to the nearest burrow system or hole underground that they use for shelter. Now, pigs are an important part of the food chain. So they are kind of on the middle area of the food chain, meaning that a lot of different predators are going to try to eat pigs. So in a place like Africa, out on the savanna, in the grasslands, that's going to be lions, hyenas, leopards, cheetahs, African wild dogs, crocodiles, some of the big snakes, some of the eagles, and smaller predators like jackals or some of the smaller cats. So they're going to have a lot of different predators to worry about. So again, with the warthogs, if it's a mama warthog with her little babies, and one of them sees something and they make that squealing sound, they'll all run to their burrow and try to get underground. And the mama warthog, she'll be the last one to go in. And she'll back down in, and then she'll kind of put her head down like this in the dirt, so that if the other predator comes in trying to get into the burrow after her, her big strong head and her face is kind of there to help be a protector for her babies that are behind her. And she can usually kind of dig in with her hooves to help hold her in place in the burrow so the predator's not as successful in getting them out. Now, one thing I really learned to love about pigs and working with them is that they are smart. They're really quite smart. Most animal intelligent behavior studies will say that pigs are probably smarter than dogs or cats, and somewhere in the range of like a 4 or 5-year-old human on some of their abilities, which is pretty intelligent. Pigs are definitely able to learn a lot of different things and really smart in interacting with people who they know can benefit them, especially in like a zoo setting. Now, to talk about these 18 different species of pigs, the smallest of the pigs are a little kind of species called the pygmy hog. They are from India, and they live in the grasslands just south of the Himalayas, so kind of in the foothills. And the grass there grows really, really tall, tall enough that rhinos and elephants can hide in the grass, because the grass grows like 8 to 10 feet tall. And in this space, there's this little tiny pig that's sometimes only like 2 feet long and not even a foot tall off the ground, and weighs between 14 and 21 pounds. That's the smallest wild species of pig out there in the world, the pygmy hog. Now, the largest species is the Eurasian wild boar. And the Eurasian wild boar, or wild pig, lives throughout the forest in Europe and Asia. And they are the ancestors of all those domesticated breeds of pigs. And they can be about 3.5 feet tall at the shoulder. They can be about 6 feet in length, and they can weigh upwards of 700 pounds. So they are definitely a very large animal, and they can definitely be a very rewarding meal to a lot of predators. Now, with those males growing the tusk and them being quite big themselves, they can be a pretty ferocious ability to defend themselves and to defend their family group. And so some predators will kind of very carefully weigh that. Is it worth trying to go after a pig species for food? Now, the species I have worked with, and I'll be putting up some information further about them on the Facebook profile later today. I've worked with 4 species of pigs when I worked at a zoo. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the most endangered of those 4, and one of the most endangered species of pigs in the world. And they are called the Visayan warty pigs. And they come from the Philippines. They used to live on about 6 different islands. And today it's estimated that they only live on 2, maybe 3 islands left. They are really quite cool looking pigs. The males get these really big, long mohawk kind of hairstyles during breeding season, and they look really funny. Their hair on those can be about 18 inches long, really crazy long hair. And then after the breeding season, all that hair falls out, and it looks like a little buzz cut up on top again. The Visayan warty pigs, like I mentioned, are critically endangered. That means there's not very many of them left. And so zoos in the United States are working in a very special breeding program called the Species Survival Plan that helps to protect the genetics and help keep a very healthy population in a zoo setting, so that if they were to go extinct in the wild, they could possibly be reintroduced out into the wild, like we've seen with some of the other animal species we've talked about in the critter chats. Visayan warty pigs I worked with at the Los Angeles Zoo and a little bit at the Phoenix Zoo, although I was an educator there, so I didn't have as much interaction with them as I did when I was their keeper at the Los Angeles Zoo. As far as pigs go, they're kind of on the smaller side, with a male maybe weighing about 70 to 90 pounds, and females being closer in the like 50 to 60 pound range. So they're kind of smaller. They're kind of a gray color. If you saw the photos I posted earlier today, the Vissian warty pig is in one of those 4 photos there. Now, the other species that I worked with at the Los Angeles Zoo as a keeper is a red river hog. And they're kind of a rusty colored red. The males can weigh almost 200 pounds, and the females can be right over like 130 to 150 pounds. They have a little bit of a tusk on the males, and their bright coloring helps them to kind of blend in with some of the mud and some of the muddy water. They come from the rainforest of Africa, and they love to be in kind of a cool, damp area a lot of the time. And they are actually not listed as threatened with endangered at this time. They're actually kind of benefiting from a lot of human expansion and farming, and they will often raid farmers' crops, which gets them into some trouble on occasion, but by and large, they're doing fairly well out there in the wild. The next species that I want to talk about is a very odd species of pig, and it's also in the photos that I posted earlier, called a babirusa. And babirusa are pretty tall pigs, and they have very little hair, so their body is pretty sleek and kind of leathery looking. They also have kind of a very interesting face that doesn't look as much like what we would think a pig species would look like. Their ears are a little smaller, and their head's just kind of a little different shape. And the males get crazy tusks. So their top jaw tusks actually grow out through the top of their mouth, out onto the top of their mouth. And sometimes they grow forward, but most of the time they grow back. And they kind of curl as they do that. And they have found skulls of babirusa where the tusk grows so much that it comes back in and starts growing back into the pig's face in another spot, making like a full loop of tusks. Somebody asked if pig tusks get hunted or if they're worth anything. Yes, sometimes, especially pigs like the babirusa. More so in like a couple hundred years ago, that was more popular. They were sometimes hunted and made into jewelry, like a bracelet. It's not as common today. It probably still happens on occasion, but it's pretty minimal. Not anywhere near like what elephants are hunted for their tusk or rhinos for their horns. Babirusa are also a little different than most other pigs. They have smaller litter sizes. So usually when a mom gives birth to pigs, it's usually like 4 to 6, sometimes 8, even 10 babies. Babirusas, it's usually 1 or 2, rarely 3. So it's much, much smaller. And the babies stay with the mom for up to 2 years, which is a lot longer than most of the other pigs. They live in a very small area of Indonesia on islands, and they're pretty threatened there as well, listed as vulnerable to extinction. And the last species of pigs that I worked with is also in that group of 4 photos I put up earlier, are the warthogs. Now, I've had the ability to work with them in a zoo setting and also see them in the wild, which is always really fun to see kind of how they interact with each other in a zoo setting, but also then see that in the wild and see like, oh, this is kind of why they do that, or this is how they do that when there's a predator around. Now at the zoo, at the Phoenix Zoo, that's where I worked with warthogs. Although I was an educator, I actually helped feed them every day as I went around and did my little talks about the animals. And the warthogs took a few days to get used to who I was, but once they learned that like, oh, this crazy guy that shows up every day at like 12 is gonna feed us, we need to like respond to him. Even though I wasn't their keeper, they learned who I was pretty quick. And once they did, I could call their names and they would all hop up and kind of come running forward because they knew I had food. And they were pretty excited about that. The keepers who worked with the warthogs there would build these elaborate systems of puzzle feeders to help the warthogs kind of have some fun, and also to... Sorry, we had a little connection issue. But they would give them these puzzle feeders or enrichment items to kind of challenge them mentally and help them have a little fun in their day. One of those was kind of a bucket like this, and they'd put a big hole in the bottom of it, and then there was a stick that came down with a ball on the end. And the warthogs would come and push that stick up, and it would open the little hole, and then some of their food pellets would fall out. And when they first built this, they thought, oh, this is going to be amazing. This is going to be a really great way for the warthogs to get a treat and have some fun interacting with this. Well, the warthogs were pretty smart, and they figured out if they pushed that stick up at an angle, they could get it to stay jammed, and then all the food would just continually fall out. And so they were able to learn how to empty that bucket of food that was supposed to last kind of throughout the day. They could empty it in about 5 minutes. And then they would have all that food on the ground, and then they wouldn't play with it as much. So the keepers had to take it back and make the hole smaller and tighter so that the stick wouldn't fit in quite in the same way. The keepers at the Phoenix Zoo also allowed the warthogs to have some control over how muddy they wanted their mud wallows. So they built in a water valve that the warthogs could turn on and off. And so if the warthogs wanted more water, they could just push it on and let it run, and it would make their mud wallow nice and soupy with a lot of water in it. And then they could turn it off when they were done with that. And it was really cool to see what the warthogs were choosing. And definitely in a warm place like Phoenix, Arizona, any of the summer months, they would let that water run for quite a while to give them a nice mud bath that they could lay in. Now that brings up kind of an interesting question of why do pigs like mud so much? Well, their skin can actually be pretty sensitive. It can get bitten by bugs, and they kind of have a harder time keeping cool. So they use that mud as both a way of cooling themselves down and as a skin protectant for getting bit by bugs. Most pigs are actually called crepuscular animals. We may have talked about this before. We know what nocturnal is, right? Those are animals that are active at night. And you may have heard of the daytime animals called diurnal. Crepuscular is the middle group. So they're active more early in the morning and kind of later in the day around sunset. But they actually sleep during the night, and they'll take a good rest during the day. So they're active for like 4 or 5 hours on each side of the sunrise and sunset. And so they'll spend a lot of time in like mud wallows during the day to help keep cool and to relax a little bit. It's kind of like going to the spa. It's a pretty good life if you're a pig. One thing I really loved about the warthogs in Africa when I saw them is that they would definitely work together with their group of warthogs, even if it's a family group over here and across the way there's another family group over here. If these warthogs sounded an alarm, these warthogs would pay attention and they'd all run for their burrows. And in most of the places where I was in Africa, they often felt that people were one of those threats. And so if they saw people or if we got too close in the truck, they would run. It was kind of rare that they would stick around. The photo I posted earlier today is from my experience in Kenya. One of the few times we got a good photo of warthogs standing, and you can see that's a mom and a dad and several babies standing nearby them. But usually they were pretty skittish around people, and people definitely will sometimes hunt not only warthogs but other pigs as well. Which brings us kind of to the threats wild pigs face. So they face habitat destruction threats. That's one of the biggest ones. Specifically with those endangered pigs in the Philippines and the Barbarossa in Indonesia. As their forest homes are getting destroyed, people cut down the trees to make lumber that honestly ends up here in the United States quite often. They also sometimes cut down the forest to make things like paper and toilet paper, and that causes problems as well. And the United States is also a big consumer of a lot of those things. So our ability to buy smarter when we're buying wood or if we're buying paper or toilet paper, try to look for something that says it's from a sustainable source, a place where people are managing and growing the trees, rather than chopping down old growth forest that may put animals like pigs at danger, but also a lot of other species. And there's a great video that I'll post up later today that shows an organization that's doing some work in the forest that are trying to help some of those endangered pigs and other species. So habitat destruction is a big problem. Also population fragmentation, especially some of these little pig endangered species that live on island groups. If there's only a few pigs that live on this island and a few pigs that live on that island over there, they're not usually going to cross the ocean to try to get to another island. And so if they become less and less on this island and less on that island, then it's causing big problems with their total population. And there's not a good, healthy population in any one place. We mentioned a little bit that people do hunt pigs quite often. Pigs are a common source of food in a lot of areas, and a way to help mitigate or lessen that is that some of these conservation organizations are helping people to learn how to raise pigs on a farm setting instead of going and hunting the wild pigs that live out in the forest. But that can also be a problem if those domestic pigs get loose. They can sometimes crossbreed and cause problems genetically with some of the wild pigs. And then also the final problem with some of the people and the pigs, oh, my dog's back, is that people will sometimes persecute the pigs. If the pigs are eating a farmer's crops, the farmer might get mad. He may try to shoot the pigs or trap the pigs. And there's ways to do that more humanely by putting up like a fence or a barrier that could help protect his crops in a way that's going to not hurt the pigs in the process. Special shout out today to an organization called the Talarak Foundation. They are doing a lot of really great work in the Philippines, where the Visayan warty pigs are from. They also work with other species, some deer and some birds. I'll post a video up that shows kind of an overview of what they work with. One of my coworkers, who was the main keeper of the Visayan warty pigs at the Los Angeles Zoo, she actually had an opportunity to go to the Philippines and work alongside these conservationists in helping protect the pigs. So she did some volunteer work with them for a couple of weeks, and she worked at their facility where they were raising some of the animals in like a zoo setting so that they could eventually release them. She also went out into the forest and helped them set up some motion sensor cameras so they could document what was living in the forest and some of that other good things. So she was able to do that. I believe it was about 8 months ago that she went over there to the Philippines, but she had a really amazing time, and she was able to share that information with me and with some of our other friends and coworkers, and that was really helpful to learn more about what people out in the native habitat are doing. So I'll be sharing some of that later on the Facebook profile today. So keep an eye out for that. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about pigs. They are definitely one of my favorite animals. I really loved working with them, and I think I have a video of me doing some work with the red river hogs and possibly the Visayan warty pigs that I'll be able to put up later on today on the Facebook profile. So stay tuned for that. I may be able to get it up on Instagram as well. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments on these videos when I post them later today on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. And feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe across all 3 platforms. And share that with your family and friends and anyone else who may be interested in Zoo Nerd and what I have to share with you. But until tomorrow, take care, have fun, be safe, be healthy, and be happy. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.